Yeah.
So like this is the kind of thing you find in the archives, you know, associating errors. So it does have section lines, but it's just big enough to be confusing.
How's our technology doing?
Actually, yeah.
It's good to know.
Leave this. What I did is I took this one and then superimposed it over that.
It's blinded.
Can we watch?
Yeah, put it on the screen over there.
That's what I was saying. I was thinking.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for coming and welcome to Highland Community College. This evening's panel discussion is funded through a grant with Humanities Kansas. Humanities Kansas believes that stories carry our culture and ideas change the world. The histories of Highland Community College and the Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska have been entwined for more than 160 years. The panel discussion is titled, Interpretation of the Past by Those Living in the Present Influences the Future. Lance Foster, Tribal Historic Preservation Office, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. Alan Kelly, Executive Committee Vice Chairman of the Iowa Tribe. And Greg Olson, author of The Iowa in Missouri and the curator at the Missouri State Archive, will be the panelists. I now want to introduce you to Mike Kelly, Highland Community College English instructor and library liaison. Mike has a bachelor's degree in history and a master's in written communication, and he will be our moderator for this evening. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pretty good crowd. They get ready for coming out tonight and braving the icy weather. Polar bears. I hear they're traveling farther south this year. Thanks to global warming. So just want to open it up here a little bit. Just a pretty broad question. Say that probably, I would bet many people here are really sort of unfamiliar with both the history of the Iowa tribe and sort of Highland in general. So just want to see if you could give us a little bit of background on the topic before we get started.
Wow, yeah, that's a big that's a big topic. The thing about the reason the Iowas ended up here in this part of the country is because they were removed. They were part of the 1830s Indian removal. That actually a lot of people blame Andrew Jackson for that, but it was started by Thomas Jefferson. He was the one who, realized that white people are going to want this land. So way back during his presidency, they started removal of tribes. Probably the most famous one you've heard about is the Trail of Tears of the Cherokees, but there were all kinds of native nations were forcibly removed. The Iowas, of course, came from the Great Lakes and made their way down through Minnesota and Iowa. And by the time Missouri became a state in 1821, they were living in northern Missouri. And of course, as history shows, they were removed from Missouri. In fact, Missouri made it illegal to be a native person after the 1830s. And so the reason that the Iowas ended up here is because the reservation was originally a 400 square mile reservation that they shared with the Saguenay. But that's why they ended up here in northeast Kansas.
So if we start with 400 square miles, what's the current square mileage of the reservation?
I'd say it's probably about 7 by 14.
Okay, so a lot smaller.
Yeah.
Well, even by 1861, by the time the Civil War started, the Iowa and the Saguenay just had an eighth of that. It didn't take them from 1836 to 1861. It was whittled down to 1/8 of what they'd started with.
Now, did they ever give a reason, like why they whittled it down, or has it just sort of happened over time?
Well, the thing is, you know, because Kansas became a state, and so white settlers were just pouring in, and of course, people were clamoring for land. And, you know, one of the things that a lot of the white people would say is, well, we've got this perfectly good Indian reservation, and it's not adding to our economic development benefit. And so they're not using it, and so we can use it. The white people could do more from it. So it's the sort of thing, you know, that gets repeated over and over.
Okay. What about more recent history of the Iowa tribe?
So as Greg said, 1836, we get moved over across the river. In 1854, the land that was ours here, that was just before the Civil War, remember? So they were trying to figure out, as a result of the Missouri Compromise, they wanted to decide which states would be free, Nebraska north of a certain line, and then Kansas would make its own decision as a popular sovereignty kind of a state. So they drew a line right across our reservation, which why we have that really weird name, Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. Because we were here before there was a Kansas or Nebraska. So 1854, and then we moved from our area around Iowa Point over to a place known as No Hearts Village near the Nemaha. And we lived there from about 1855 to roughly 1885 to 1887. That's when they ended the post office there. And that was about the time period of allotment. Has anybody heard of allotment? Allotment was another method as they were whittling down the reservations, right? Allotment is when they took the smallest part of the reservation, the small reservation, and they actually divided it into a grid, right? Because they wanted to split up tribes from living the old way in a village with that kind of the clans and the old extended families and everything. They wanted to make us what Jefferson called like in the yeoman farmers, right? So they wanted to have nuclear families instead with a dad and a mom and kids and all that, instead of having uncles and aunts and all these kind of big awkward clan kind of a situation, right? And most farming families today really are extended families. But they wanted that nuclear family and to tie us to a little plot of land. But they had another reason behind it too. Because as soon as they got these things down, and there's 160 acres if you're the male head of a family, it was 80 acres if you were a female head of the family, and if you were an orphan, you got 40 acres. And in that period, if they counted you as a competent Indian, in other words, you understood banking, you understood laws, you understood English, all this stuff, they gave you a period of 25 years that your land would go out of protection, out of trust status, and it would go into what they call fee simple status. That meant you could put mortgages on it, you could lose it if you weren't trying to take care of all your financials the way the white world wanted you to. And we also had some really fun guys who lived locally who kind of teamed up to find out what your weaknesses were. This guy drinks, that guy he has problems with his wife, whatever. So they try to find the weaknesses to find out ways that this guy can get their land from him, right? So that was the allotment period, and it went to like 1906 was the Newsom book, I think, when they actually, you can see these, so-and-so drinks, so-and-so's a lousy housekeeper, this one likes to sleep around, da-da-da-da. So they could figure out how the weakness was to get the land from them. So if you were a competent Indian and you could speak the language and whatever, they could shorten that up to immediately. So we have this 12,000 acre reservation in 1887. It's divided. By 1930 or so, 1935 I think is when I saw the map, but 90% of it was lost. How did they get lost? Because the orphans, they would have white lawyers and stuff as being their trustees and sell it. He needs the money, so they sell it to some of their own buddies and some of their own family members, right? And we had even our agents, they'd be like, oh, I'm going to not work here anymore, and they'd have their friends sell it, buy it, and then they buy it cheaper from their friend. Richardson was one of those guys. That was the same time period that Highland was established in that time period. So by 1935, we had lost 90% of our land, and about that time period they had what they called the Iowa Project. And as part of the FDR and the New Deal and all that, they sent people out to the reservation to see if there was land that they could buy. It would be kind of the new core of our reservation. And they found about 6 or 7 tracts of land, and that became kind of the core of the land that we own today. And we only own maybe 1/3 of our own reservation. Like most reservations are pretty checkerboarded because most tribes lost their land to some degree or another. Flathead, the Salish Kootenai Reservation, Montana is terribly checkerboarded, but we have the same experience. And so what do we use our money in that we get from casinos and stuff? Whenever we can, we buy our land back. And we only own, like I said, maybe 1/3 of our reservation.
But we were down to just like one allotment. We got down to just one little square.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we made that much progress in buying that back.
Yeah.
To 1/3. So
Right.
the land is expensive now, so it's
Yes.
hard to.
Yeah, it's not, it's like 12 to 14,000 or more just for an acre.
And how many allotments were there originally? You know,
Well, like I said, the family, God, what was it? I can't remember how, Russ, do you remember how many allotments there were total at the end? Well, anyway, it was difficult because they had like the Barrett family would have like father, mother, and all the kids. I would say there were, I'm guessing, maybe 50 or so, maybe. But thanks for asking that question because I really got to like work on that.
Yeah.
and by the way, I brought a map that I made using some archival sources, and it's mounted on a board down here. So this is, the map shows the original size of the reservation, so if anybody's interested, it's floating around, so maybe take a look at it later or whatever.
I guess more modern times, what's the Iowa tribe currently struggling with? Other than just buying land back?
Well, right now, since it's modern times, we're struggling with good water. Our streams are starting to dry up, you know, due to the global warming and the environment. So we're going to have to deal with our water. A lot of sediments are in the creeks that go past us. It's really not safe to be in the water. And we have mercury in the fish.
Nitrates
Yeah, nitrates are still continuing to rise. So that's going to be our next biggest issue, I'd say.
So there's an environmental degradation for all of us, you know, and we're, you know, I'm a member on Facebook of a number of things, all the way from deep adaptation to near-term human extinction. And the thing is, I think the young people especially are facing the reality, and there's a lot of really soul searching, trying to figure out what to do next, what to figure out about your life, you know, what am I supposed to do. So one thing I can say is that you have to endure. Whoever you are, remember who you are, and to keep going no matter what. Just endure. That's the lesson you can learn from Native people. I mean, we changed, like we're not as dark as our ancestors were because there was a lot of white folks that came in and we intermarried with them. But we retained like Bahoji Iche, our language, you know, as much as we can. But that was washed out of us in terms of the boarding schools. They beat us. So even our relatives, our ancestors said, you can't learn your language. If you learn your language, you're going to go through what I went through. And they broke their hearts, they broke their spirits, they broke their bodies a lot of times. Both sexual, physical, all kinds of abuse. People are buried out here by the museum. You drive by sometimes. There are students buried out there who went through that experience. So I think it's going to be difficult, but what we need to do is to try to connect with each other and remember who you are, never forget that, and endure whoever you are, whatever way you need to.
Now, one thing that we are doing, we're getting into regenerative ag, so we're trying to get away from pesticides and fertilizers. And we've actually partnered with the ag students here too to do that. So, you know, they're welcome to come over and see, you know, what we're doing and things like that. But we have our own honeybees, which are doing very well, and hopefully we'll get away from growing corn and grow hemp. Or something
Well,
like that.
Like regenerative agriculture, people might not know what that is. So you have your standard kind of industrial agriculture, heavy soybean, crop, corn rotation, which requires a lot of treatments like anhydrous ammonia, and the land is left barren at the end of the season. And for a long time that worked for people, there a long time, but now they've discovered the land won't grow anything. The land can't absorb water even because the land has been chemically changed so much. So the thing we're trying to do is what's called regenerative agriculture, which is to have diverse crops that stay in the land longer, that you try to bring the health of the soil back, so you have the microorganisms, you have worms, you have insects, those things, but actually the soil is a living thing. It's not dead, it's not just rocks and dirt. It is, you see the difference between living dirt and living soil, and that's the difference between soil and dirt. And then also, as part of that, instead of say, we have cattle, so we restrict cattle in a real tight kind of rotational grazing pattern, and that actually helps the land. And instead of, they have to eat very quickly and eat everything so that they move them so that it regenerates and the cycle of the nitrates go back into the soil, and it doesn't get impact any one place for any long length of time. And the soil, the feet kind of break up the soil so the water absorbs better. So we're trying to find a way that, and it's productive. I mean, soybeans right now, I think they said soybeans we're continuing to grow at least 2 weeks after standard soybeans stopped growing because of the cover of the soil and the warmth of the soil and the moisture of the soil. So we have to try to take care of the land if we're going to be here another 500 years, because it's starting to die. As we know, the world's in a difficult situation. So we can't change the world, but we can change where we live.
We could step back for a moment, and you mentioned the boarding and mission schools. So just for our audience out there who may be unfamiliar with the boarding and mission school system, can you fill us in on that?
I'll start with that. Excuse me. So to kind of piggyback on what I was talking about earlier, the removal process, the removal of native nations westward ended up with everybody on a reservation, basically. And so once native nations were on reservations, they were on a confined piece of land, and it was easier, I think, for the United States government to sort of, have control or attempt to have control over them. And one of the ways they did that was by trying to educate them to be more like white folks. And you probably have all heard that in the late 1800s there were government-run boarding schools. But before the government-run boarding schools, in the early, I'd say as early as the 1830s, there were religious-run boarding schools. The government would contract with, in Kansas here, I think they contracted with the Methodists, the Baptists, and the Presbyterians. So you've heard of Shawnee Mission, Kansas. Well, that was a Shawnee mission, and I think that was maybe a Methodist mission. Here, the Presbyterians came to the reservation here, or to the mission here that's just east of town. And their original thing, this was part of, really, eventually became a global thing where they were sending missionaries to Africa and to China. But, they kind of worked out the issue working with native nations here. So they sent missionaries out across the country to live with native folks. And Samuel Irvin was a Presbyterian missionary. His wife, I think her name was Eliza, and they had at least 2 kids that moved out here with them. And of course, Irvin, if you know that name, you know that he's the one who had a hand in starting this school. But he was the person who started the mission just east of town here, and he's the one who started this. At first it was just a Christian mission, with trying to get natives to go to church, and after they'd been there for about 5 or 6 years, they built the mission school. They got the funding from the Presbyterians in Pennsylvania to build the mission school. And then it became sort of a large scale. I think that school was built to have 70 students, but they had a really hard time keeping probably more than 20 or 25 students in there at any given time. Part of the deal is that I think they learned from this experience, because the school was so close to the villages, that when the kids got tired, or they wanted to go home, they'd just leave, and it was usually within walking distance. And that was one of the things they thought was a failure. But in the school here, they taught kids, they would take away their native clothes, they would give them white clothes that were shipped, donated clothes from Pennsylvania. They would give them white names. And I found correspondence in the Presbyterian mission files where if you gave enough money to the Presbyterian mission school, you could have a kid named after you. So there could be a kid named Greg Olson running around, and that's how a lot of the people got their names. So they took away, their clothing, they probably often would cut their hair, they took away their name, really changed their identity. And then they would learn a lot of the same things that other kids in other schools would learn. They'd learn the catechisms, they learned from the same reader books that other kids would. And really, it was just kind of like forced indoctrination.
For half the day, but then the other half of the day,
Right.
if you were a boy, you were sent out to work in the fields or shoe horses or whatever, cheap labor,
Yeah.
free labor. And if you were a girl, you were taught to like sew and do all the woman's work and bake and all that stuff, because they wanted you to be able to be employees or servants
Right.
of the white farmers in the area.
And you weren't even an American citizen at that time, so.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, well, I could go on about that, but.
How about, what sort of involvement did the Iowa tribe have with Father Irvin and the mission school?
Well, they didn't have any control about it. I mean, in the early days, the Iowans were really pretty good at kind of resisting that education. In fact, a lot of the kids that went to that school were actually, there were a few Iowans. The Sac and Foxes wouldn't have anything to do with it. Hardly any of their kids went. They just completely wouldn't have anything to do with the mission or the missionaries, really. But over time, they would import kids from north, so you'd get some Shawnee kids, some Sioux kids. Generally, they'd be orphans,
I think that was that break when, they had initially started it as an orphanage, as a school,
Right.
day school and stuff for
That's true.
Sac Fox and Ioways. Sac Fox wouldn't go, like I said. So it was mostly Ioways. And they did some books printed of the Iowa language,
Right.
which is some of the earliest documentation of our language,
Yeah.
which is a part of the Siouan language family, like Lakota. Their word for buffalo, Tatanka, everybody knows Tatanka, but there's Te, which is like a female, and ours is Che. Or the word tipi, you hear our chi, which is one of our word for a house. But what happened when we were moved from, our reservation was shrunk, and we were moved from Iowa Point, away from Highland area down by the river, and we moved over by the Nemaha. They said, God, we don't have any Iowa students anymore, and they changed it to an orphanage. So they actually made it an official orphanage, and it only lasted that way, maybe
I think by 1862, it was pretty much
kaput,
closed,
right?
yeah.
Right.
And he moved to his operation here in town.
Yeah, and in fact, this hall, what's the name of this hall?
Irvin Hall.
Irvin Hall, that's those bricks made out of half of what that museum is down there. That museum used to be it was a mission, but it was twice as long, 100 and some
Yeah.
feet long. But he tore down half, and it was all from our money, from our annuities. It wasn't his money anyway. And they tore it all down, and they brought it over here and built that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. But as far as like the Iowa's role in it, really, they didn't really have any choice in the matter, and to what extent they were involved was resistance, I think.
Mostly passive resistance.
Yeah.
Sort of like, okay, yeah, and then do what you want to do anyway.
This is our life now.
Yeah.
So next question I have is just kind of talking about, historians say that we teach a skewed version of history that sort of glosses over, we'll say, the more embarrassing or shameful moments of America's actions. What are your thoughts on this characterization?
I'll start with that. as the historian, or one of the historians. Yeah, I think that's definitely true because, okay, so I'm not Native, I'm white, and I know that a lot of white people think that it's unpatriotic to question things that, you know, they want to claim the history that's good, the history where things went well. You know, the history where we went over to Europe and defeated the Nazis, you know, and where we put down the rebellion in the South and things like that. But what we are far less interested in acknowledging is the things that didn't go so well, like slavery and genocide of Native people and things like that. Those had just as big a role in forming our country as anything else. But those are difficult issues for a lot of people to deal with, you know, in the classroom. And so I think it's just easier to skip over it. And you know, especially people, it kind of equate patriotism with only good news, good stories. So I think that's kind of where that comes from.
And that's all we want. We want the full story. You
Yeah,
know, we don't want to,
exactly.
we don't want to bash America. We don't want to, but we don't want to be bashed either. We want the full story, the good and the bad, the whole story. You know, like that symbol in Taoism, right? You got the dark and the light. You have a little light in the dark and a little light in the dark. But there's not a matter of good or evil in that sense. There's a matter of, it's all part of creation. It's all part of how things work together. There's the night and the day. You can have a mountain without a valley. So we just want the full story told. We don't want, they talk about revisionism or whatever. It's revisionism not to tell the whole story. That's what we want, the whole story.
You know, and something that Lance said earlier too about, you know, when you said remember who you are and survival and things like that, and I think, and I've been guilty of this myself in the past, I think that even just the narrative of the way we write about Native Americans is skewed because so many of the books, even when authors are trying to do the right thing, the whole narrative is Indians die. Indians died, you know, they're not around anymore. And, you know, and this kind of came up in discussion with that popular book that came out, The Killers of the Flower and the Moon, and the author who went down to the Osage Reservation and interviewed people. I heard Ryan Redcorn talking about this, who was Osage recently, and he was saying, you know, the whole narrative of that book is, tell me how your family died, you know, tell me how they died, how were they killed, and really what we should be asking is, tell me how your family survived. How did they survive that? And for me, that really just coalesced a lot of things I've been thinking about. And that's just an example of a narrative we just need to kind of flip over. And so, you know, in history, we need to talk about, you know, how did the Iowas survive? You know, given everything they've been through. And I think, you know, what Alan and Lance have been talking about with some of the initiatives that the tribe's taken on now, buying back their land, trying to heal the land, things like that. Those are just the more recent in the whole long history of survival, you know.
I think part of that in my situation is my grandmother married a non-Indian. My mother married a non-Indian, and that was all about survival too. And that was the reason that they did that. They were proud of their heritage and the whole deal, but they wanted to make sure their children survived. So they married in that way. And not only that, if you put down white on your birth certificate, you become an American citizen. If you didn't put it on there, you would not be an American citizen. Now, American citizenship for Native Americans started in 1924. So a lot of people don't know that part either, but that was what I see in a lot of my past.
By that time, the natives had fought in, you know, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, and they weren't even citizens. Revolutionary War, yeah. Pretty much every conflict that this nation has been involved in, Native people have served in, you know, not until 1924 when these citizens of the country.
I guess kind of a little bit of a follow-up then is, I'm a little bit curious too, is how did the Iowa tribe then survive?
Different tribes took different routes, you know. Some tribes were more isolated, Navajo, Lakota, and there were very numerous people, you know. We had a total collapse of our population. We were probably never more, at the time of contact, more than 5,000 or so people. And then by the time we were put on, Lewis and Clark estimates around 3,000. By the time we went here, I think we were like 800 or so.
Yeah, a little under 1,000.
Right. And then within a few years, between the cholera and the diseases brought by through the Oregon Trail and the drinking and the despair and just the self-destruction, at a certain point, it went down to 300. And then at the lowest point, we were 150 people. You think a little town around here,
Yeah.
150 people, we got to marry? Your relatives, you know? You got to marry your own grandpa. So, you know, people will get lonely, and like Alan said, if you're a pretty girl, you know, there's a white dude likes you, he'll protect you when you go to town, he'll make sure you don't lose your land. You know, that's your best option, you know, maybe. So a lot of stuff happened that people had to do to endure, to get through the next day, because they were thinking about their kids. And they weren't thinking about themselves, they weren't trying to get rich, they weren't trying to whatever. They're thinking about, how am I going to get my baby to be an adult and survive? And that's what they're focused on.
What time period was that low?
That low? That low, I think about 300 was it 1883 or something like that?
I think when the group went down to Oklahoma, there
That's
were about
right.
90 down there and about 100 up here.
Yeah.
And so then I think maybe after that, it dropped for a while.
Right,
even
right.
more.
And the last, there were only 4 full-bloods there in the early 1900s, up here. Four. Washburn was one of them. As far as full-blood Iowas. Now, the thing is, we had, like, okay, our traditional stories, everybody has traditional stories about how things were created, you know. The Christian one starts with Adam and Eve, right? Our traditional story starts with, basically, we were animal people that lived on this earth forever. For example, my clan, Bear Clan, we have a story where 4 bear brothers were digging through the ground, coming up to the surface. Okay, 4 bear brothers, and they felt like a root of a tree, and they pulled themselves up, and they looked around them, and they shook their head free of dirt to see what was around them, and they saw that they thought they were the first ones there, but they saw there were tracks of other animals. And so those were our clan names. You 4 together, left hand where you grab the root, you know, sycamore, shakes his head. All these names, we're like a living story of our origin story. But every group of people that came from different places, there's the one conventional one that say from the Great Lakes, but we have other stories that say we were always there, the mound builders and everything. So we had elk and buffalo, and we had thunder, and we had wolf, and we had all these different clans that came together. And over time, sometimes we fought, sometimes we bonded, sometimes we married. And in the old days, they call them Matadanida, when animals and human beings could talk together. In those days, when we encountered each other, we, over time, decided, you know, we each had gifts. Buffalo had the corn, bear had different kind of medicines. The eagle had the Thunder Clan had the war club bundle and everything. So they came together. It's like special departments in the United States, right? Different ethnic groups have different strengths that they bring to the mix to become a nation, right? So after we became a nation, that kind of way of being, we became Indian people. We changed from bears, you know, for example, my clan changed from bears to human beings, Indian people, right? And then, again, sort of like this old wine in new bottles, we had to survive. We had to, and all our resistance diseases and everything had melted away. We were smashed. We were like I said, down to about 100, 150 people. And so we intermarried. And so, again, we changed in our appearance from animal to Indian to Moke, you know, white people, colored. But as I said up north, it's not what this is, it's what's in here. That's what you are. So we have, and then sometimes it's tough, you know, we go along with other Indian people and they're like, well, I tried to grow braids, but it looked like Pippi Longstocking.
Yeah.
It didn't look good. It looked ridiculous. So luckily for us, we shaved our heads like the Iroquois, you know, so I went that direction. But you remember who you are and you carry that memory, you carry the memory of who you are, your people, and you move it forward. Now, I didn't have children. Some people have children, that's good. I didn't have it, so my way of doing that is to impart our history and our traditions and who we are and our connection to the land. That's how I hope I will live through, and our language, because most of our language is gone. To keep it going as much as I can, and connect our people with each other. Like, we're split apart. That was part of the intergenerational trauma that we experienced. To not trust anybody, to destroy each other, to fight with each other. They set us against each other, and that's why we're just kind of fragmented sometimes. But if we can join and build that trust again, become a people, that's what we're trying to do, and I hope that works.
So, what's the Iowa tribe, what's their current enrollment numbers today?
We're about, nationwide, 4,500.
Okay, that's a lot better than 150. So, kind of on the rise again. So, I think next question here. This is a little bit plays into, like on the news, you see a lot of people tearing down Confederate monuments, or to a lesser extent, I got into a discussion about some of the old cartoons. Disney Plus came out, and they're talking about some of the slightly, we'll just say, racially insensitive depictions in older cartoons, and trying to either censor those, or do we show them, how people were. Is this a way, do you think that, we're talking about something like this, are we trying to hide our past, or are we actually trying to shine a spotlight on it?
Well, there's a couple different things going on there. As far as a lot of those Confederate memorials and statues that are coming down, a lot of those were actually put up in the 1890s, 1900, 1910, as a way for, by that time, the Civil War had been mythologized and the lost cause of the Confederacy. And a lot of those were put up as a way of, it was a Jim Crow era. A lot of those statues were a way of kind of reinforcing racism and trying to keep African Americans, from really getting, their full potential and freedom. It was a way of part of the Jim Crow era. So that's, I'm sure, not what was going on with the Disney cartoons, but.
It's sort of tying this together.
Yeah.
There's actually a method is that when you hear about some of the counties that are nearby, they're named after people who are, well, big locally.
Yeah.
We're also got that way by sort of swindling tribal members. So is that, I guess, how do you feel about the history of that, or like discussion that we never hear about?
Well, life is complicated, right?
Well, it's kind of like you said, that, we do need to tell the whole
We
story.
need to tell the whole story.
Education, we need to keep that alive, even if it's bad, to educate people. Because we need to let people know that this isn't the way it should be,
Well, there's that example. We have Baptiste Roy. We have people who, we had that era. What was the name of that one agent? That we had people who were part black, part Indian too, kicked off by the agents, kicked off the rolls because they're racist against black people. So you could be like a mixed white and Indian, and that's fine.
Jeffrey Dorian.
Was kicked off.
Reservation for being black.
Right. So the racism was just, it's part of American history. You can't deny it. It is still part of American history.
I think he was
Still
intelligent too.
For what?
Yeah, he was helping the Indians. He was helping the
being
Iowans.
intelligent.
He actually was
Right.
like, he made sure the treaties weren't swindling them and stuff.
Yeah.
That wasn't what the bosses wanted to have happen. So the thing is that it's always been that way, and it still is that way. The thing is that we have to tell the whole truth, like those statues. One option, and it's an understandable and good option in many cases, tear them down, right? At the same time, there are other statues that could be added, other statues about that story
Right.
to tell the full story. Because what happens is when you take something away, then they make up stories about it. You know, they'll say like, they're trying to edit history, revision history, whatever, and everything. No, tell the whole ugly thing, all the way, you know. We're all children of disaster in some ways, you know, our mothers endured things we can't even think about. So, but we gotta remember that, but we gotta remember that we did endure. That the only way we can kind of make their lives bearable is that we succeed.
But give context to,
Give context.
to those things.
The whole story.
So then, what would you say to future historians? That's kind of a funny phrase, future historians, who are going to, 100 years from now, 500 years from now, are going to be, assuming we survive, study us, or I guess if when aliens arrive, want to check out all the pyramids. But what would you say to them, or what advice would you give?
Well, I
Take Facebook with a grain of salt.
Yeah. I often wonder about that because, when you read, you don't have to go very far back and you can read history, especially about Native Americans, and it can be really biased, So I'm kind of wondering, okay, what are our biases?
Right.
What are my biases and how will they show?
I was listening to a comedian, that's real true, Greg. For example, when I was a kid, even in the 60s, 1960s, I remember hearing all the ethnic slurs and racial jokes. That was acceptable.
Right.
But if you said the F-bomb, or shit, like a husband would jump you out in the parking lot, like talking that way in front of his wife. You didn't say that way in front of my wife, but you can make all the whatever kind of jokes you can about those people, whatever. Now it's the opposite. It is totally opposite. I hear a 3-year-old using the F-bomb, and it's okay. And I'm like, whoa, dude. But if you say, today I met this Mexican guy, and they're like, but why was he Mexican?
Yeah.
Because he wasn't Mexican. I don't know. But so the thing that we got to remember about future history is the things that we think are okay now is not going to be okay.
Right.
It's kind of like the music of your parents. They thought that was the thing, that was the bomb right then. That was like, and their parents think that their music will suck. Well, the music you think is cool right now, when you're old and in a old people's home, people are gonna be like, oh, that's old people music. It's gonna happen. It's just the way it is. It's just nature, how it goes on that way. So what we just gotta know that as far as judging people by standards at a different time, I would say this. I would say history may change, but at the same time, even the people that talk about changing standards, if they follow the Bible or whatever philosophical system, there's always right and wrong. There's always right and wrong. That doesn't change.
I would say maybe to add on to that, one thing that I see happening that's really exciting too is more Native writers are telling their own stories. And that's, for too long, the history of Native people has been told by white people like me. And so that's a real interesting thing that I think can only help, get the stories out and maybe kind of realign some of the history skewness, if that's possible, that we talked about earlier.
And you think that this would be kind of a positive use of Facebook, social media, YouTube, to kind of connect with the languages or kind of get that history back out there? Let people tell their own story?
I think so. But there is, the thing we kind of drifted into an area, those people who know philosophy talk about postmodernism and deconstructionism and Derrida and Foucault and all those guys. The thing is that I was going to graduate school when that stuff was had been saturated in the culture.
Right.
So at that time, we still believed in truth, what is true and what is false, and now we're kind of what they call post-truth, which is on one hand, they say everybody has a truth, and that's true, but there's also, that drifts into what we've experienced today in our culture, which is, since there's nothing true, it's all fake news, it's all whatever, and you have to have a standard. You have to have a standard, what is true, what is right, what is wrong. And just a golden rule, if nothing else, treat people the way you want to be treated.
Well, part of history will be when they talk about mascots. And right now, that's controversial too, so there's people that don't see anything wrong with it, and then people that see things wrong with it, and I see things wrong with it. But you're not gonna convince everybody of that.
Have you guys ever talked, or has the Kansas City Chiefs ever contacted the tribe to get your support, or?
They've got our Boys and Girls Club, you know, and took them down there and showed them stuff and all that stuff, you know, try to, you know, make it good. I said, the worst part of the Kansas City Chiefs part is when they do the tomahawk chop and things like that, you know. And then what happens when you have a native mascot is, when they do these parades like in high schools, they'll say, let's kill the Indians, and, you know, things like that happen. Well, other kids see that, you know, younger kids see that, and they, you know, that's just not right. And like I said, Native Americans weren't even American citizens until 1924. So if they're a mascot, that means they're an animal, so they're in the animal group.
Yeah, well, dehumanization.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
What's interesting also about the Kansas City Chiefs is that back in the 1920s, they had kind of the Boy Scouts that were the arrow and all that kind of thing. So they had a lot of white people that romanticized Indian people, and lo, the Indian sees the scout, you know. And I mean, it's just kind of this stereotypical stuff, right? So they had all these hobbyists that wanted to dress up like Indians and go woo and all this kind of stuff, right? And play Indian, right? Because it was romantic out in the woods, because the frontier was gone now. So one of these fellows up in Wyoming, these white guys, came to Missouri, and he began establishing this camp here. Probably some of you know that. And it's a pretty powerful group in Missouri, and there's a lot of bankers and lawyers, and they have a lot of millions of dollars, this place, right? But anyway, this fellow back in, I think it was 1930s, 40s, came here. And then there was, what they call the Texas Steers, the Texas Longhorns or something. There was a football guy, a football coach team down in Texas, and he was looking for a new place to be. So this guy from here, but anyway, he went down there, and he said, you come up and you visit here in Missouri, you know, you might like it, you know, so Kansas City barbecue, all that good stuff. And this guy really did like it, and he was looking for a new place. I said, sure. And so he named, the Chiefs is not named after us, not named after Indian people. It's named after this phony baloney guy that played Indian. That's the irony of it. Okay, good, yeah.
Well, when you talk to folks who are defending the name of the Chiefs and the Lord and things like that, they say, well, the Chiefs was named after H. Bartle, one of the mayors of Kansas City, whose nickname was Chief. What people usually omit to say when they tell that story is H. Bartle was one of the founders of the tribe of Mikosay.
Right, right.
Which is basically Boy Scouts playing Indian.
Yep.
Right.
I've
At that level.
had law partners who were significant, you know, had significant roles in that.
And at that level, it's understandable. Little boys like to play Indian. That's understandable. But it turns into a big, almost Masonic, kind of a secret society that's all about money. And that's what their main thing is. And we have a tribal member that actually belonged to it as a boy, and as he got older, like, there's something wrong here. How come you don't want to actually talk to other tribes and really know what's going on and maybe learn from them? And they're like, nah, we don't need that. We don't want to do anything with Indian stuff. But they'll have these big, phony ceremonies that's totally made up. And this is what we deal with all the time.
We had that in Illinois too. My dad,
Similar groups up there.
similar groups, all the Boy Scouts out there.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a chapter in Nebraska too, because they came to the deal with that meeting I was at with up in Omaha, with all the tribes, and asked for their permission. We all said no.
Yeah, I think they're still going too, in Southern Illinois.
There's another environmental challenge, for example. We learned about up in Nebraska on the Nemaha River, which is our northern boundary, that they're having this big mine that they're developing, Elk Creek Mine, and it has these strategic minerals that use in robotics and military applications, scandium, niobium, I think one other one. And their plan is for 30 years, they're gonna dig into the ground and dig this huge cavern, and there'll be all this hot water that's produced as part of this process, and the groundwater, it's all salty and stuff. But they're gonna take a big pipe and go all the way across the land and dump it into the Missouri River. And it's the former governor of Nebraska that owns that. A lot of his, various political appointees and buddies from his system, they're making money off of that, and they're gonna dump all this 90-something degree water into the Missouri for 30 years. And we're all downstream from that. We're all like gonna get the effects of that, but nobody knows about these things.
So I guess next question then would be about the old museum and the old mission. So I guess it's been sitting empty now for many years. What would you guys, if you, in a perfect world, or if you had all the money you needed to do whatever you wanted to do with it, what would you like to see done with it?
I think it would take a lot of money. We were talking about this earlier.
We were.
Yeah.
When they closed it down, I remember hearing that it was costing the state of Kansas $40,000 a year in terms of salary, operating expenses, maintenance, all that stuff, to keep it open. And that's why Governor Brownback shut it down as part of the cost saving strategy they had at the time, to shut down all the culture and art and all that stuff that wasn't part of his idea of the world. And so it's been in mothballs for what, 10 years plus, 13, 14, 15? A long time. And a building left empty is a building that decays. And it's heavy, you got where the elevator's starting to separate from it, the foundation's settled, there are problems with the floors. All the stuff that was in there got moved down to Kansas, Topeka for the most part, or spread around different people in the community, who some had donated things, some had stuff on display, but it's been empty. And has anybody been down there? Been down that way?
Is it just, are they running heat or?
There's nothing. You can go there and the signs are kind of bent up.
Yeah.
And actually, in some ways, our traditions is that there's spirits in the land. The land is alive. The land knows when you're taking care of it, when it's not. And I tell you, we've been down there, and weird little swarms of flies come out of nowhere and chase us out.
Yeah.
There was, the water's all stagnant. The things are growing strange. It feels like it's a very unhappy place. It's not being taken care of. And it feels sticky, kind of creepy in some ways, But that used to be a powerful place too. And that's what we'd like to see. We'd like to see that place brought back to some health. But as far as what can you do with the building and everything, well, we have reasons there. Not only is it a segment of the trail that's left, the only one I think that's really left in Kansas. We have students buried in the land there, okay? And there's a lot of memories saturating that place. And perhaps some kind of if we end up with it again, which we might, we'd like to come up with some way to work with Highland College to have a joint management plan or a joint use plan or something, so that it's a healing place for students, basically descendant, I would say spiritual and some descendants of Irvin and his legacy, and the descendants of our ancestors. It could be a place to heal. It could be a place to bring something back.
I guess we're coming up on an hour here, so I got one last question, really open-ended on this one. So just where would you like to go from here?
Other than Hawaii?
Yeah, well, more metaphorical, I guess. Hawaii is never a bad option, though. But what should we take away from this?
I think, for me, I think this is a matter of think who you are, be who you are in the face of anybody telling you otherwise, no matter what. Endure for you and your family. Whoever you think your people are, endure for them. Because you come from a long line of people. Wherever they came from, you gotta be who you are and carry that through you. And I would say, this is a place, every place you are in your life, there's a reason for it. Something to learn from it. Even the most place that you're like, what the heck am I doing? You're learning something that you'll understand in years to come. And between that and maybe helping us if we end up trying to work with this old mission that's so unloved right now, to maybe help us make that better.
Okay. How about you?
Well, for me as a historian, kind of what we were talking about earlier, my reason for writing the books about the highways that I do is to try to, I live in Missouri, and the highways and a lot of other natives had such a big part in the founding of that state, and yet no one really thinks about them in that way. And so, I've been trying to kind of tell that story, to get the highway people, in particular, their place in Missouri history. But as we were talking here, just to kind of commit myself more to telling the whole story, giving context to ugly things that have happened in the past, and tell more about how we survived rather than how we died.
Okay.
And I'd like to see everybody learn more about their history, or all the history that took place, and try to make sure that bad stuff doesn't happen anymore. And that we all put race aside, and we're all one person, we're all from one creator, and everybody needs to work together and make the world a great place to live.
Would that be,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank everybody for coming out tonight, and thanks for Humanities Kansas, and for our panel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
and thank you guys for coming.
Thank you guys too for coming out.
I have a form for you guys to sign, at your
A little bit of it. Thank you. There we go. Try to get to the tobacco and coffee, but we're a tobacco-free campus,
Okay.
so or whatever, it's okay. But, yeah.
Does anybody have any questions besides, would you like to know any questions about tribe or anything? Yes.
If I wanted to know more about like obviously there's a lot more to learn from all this, and you probably didn't have time to say everything you wanted to. Where would I go to learn more and hear what you guys have to say?
About our tribe specifically?
Just anything you have to say about the tribes, just places to learn more.
What's your website?
Yeah, Lance has a really good website.
Yeah, just Google Iowa, Lance Foster, whatever, you'll find some stuff there. I would also say there's a really good book, also it's called All the Real Indians Are Dead and 20 Other Myths About Native Americans. Is a good one to look at, because that talks about casinos, it talks about mascots, it talks about pretty much just, it's a good place to start.
And if you want to learn the language, type in Lance Foster on YouTube, and you can learn some of our language.
A little bit, yeah, here and there.
Do all tribes speak the same language?
Do what?
All tribes? do
No.
they speak?
There's no Indian language any more than there's one white people music, but white people, or Asian language or whatever, right? Actually, there were they say 500 nations, but in any case, there's hundreds of Native American languages, some that are as mutually unintelligible as Chinese and English.
What about like Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota?
Well, those are, as you can tell, there's some degree of a switch of sound. So they're all what people call Sioux, right?
Yeah.
But it's not really, Sioux's is not a proper term,
Yeah.
because it comes from an Algonquian, not always Sioux, the little snakes, okay, which means the little guys are enemies because the Iroquois were the big snakes. But the relationship is there. It's important here, I think, to talk about multivocality, that we can have a story about the unification of, or the unity of a story of people, but that everybody has their own history too. So conventionally, what happened was, in the 1700s, there was a split, a division among these people who lived in Minnesota, and some went further onto the plains, and they became the Lakota, and some stayed more along Mississippi and up into the Great Lakes area, and they were the Dakota. And the people in the middle, the Nakota, the spoke Nakota, like the Yankton and some of the others. So they're all related. They're all what they call the Ocheti Shakoni, which are like the 7 fires. But so they're relatives, they're allies. But there are 3 divisions of the language. And what's funny, there's a joke. Okay, so La for Lakota, right? And Da for Dakota, right? So did you hear about why I was, this is a Dakota joke. Did you hear why I was late for work? I had a Bedeau out. Yeah. Anyway, so there's a difference, like friend is Kola in Lakota, my friend, Kola. Whereas it's Koda in Dakota. And Kona in Dakota. Right, right. Exactly. So the language is similar, but there's a substitution of sound.
A little bit like English, British English, and American English.
Yeah.
So,
Well, then you have things where a lot of language are based on Latin. A lot of, European languages are based on Latin. Just like you have the same thing in Native nations where, like Siouan languages, there's all kinds of different branches of Siouan, and they have the same kind of root, but they've gone off kind of
Like
like Spanish.
French, bien, and bueno in Spanish,
Yeah.
right?
If you want to learn how to speak Klingon, that's pretty close to native language. He got that, he copied off of native languages to make that language. So,
no, yeah.
What's one for success?
Kapla.
Kappa.
Thanks, Duolingo. And also plug for Duolingo for High Valerian and other fake languages. But someday, do they have Navajo or anything like that on Duolingo?
I don't do Duolingo.
Oh, okay.
They do on Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, Rosetta Stone does. Today, yeah.
like Kemosabe.
Oh.
And Star Wars has been, and you can get now a whole version of Star Wars. Now it's been dubbed.
I could see that. That was somebody who's a doctoral or master's project.
But it's out there.
Yeah.
It's real.
Other questions? Anything?
This sounds like Buick. Anyone? Anyone?
Yeah, it's sort of a snapshot of my weekday.
Oh, yeah, and here's the maps.
And the map's really interesting because he's overlaid, took a map of where we are, what we look like today, and then overlaid where those things, those original settlements.
I don't have 20/20, so. I'm gonna set this back here, if you'd like to take a look at it, as you depart, when you depart.
And you'll notice that it's a really weird configuration. The pink is the Sac and Fox land and the yellow is Iowa land. And the reason it's that weird configuration is they gave them, to the south was the Kickapoo Reservation and to the north was the Great Nemaha River. And the whites were really in a hurry to get the Ioways and the Sac and Fox out of Missouri, but they weren't. It took them a while to get a surveyor out here to survey the reservation, and by the time they got here, the Sac and Fox were on one side of Wolf Creek and the Ioways were on the other. So the surveyor had to make that kind of jog, and the line for a while between the Sac and Fox and the Ioways was Main Street out here. And so I guess that's why this was Iowa land. That was used for the college because it was on the north side of Main Street.
I know somebody else asked this question of me earlier because we called you the Iowa tribe. What is the Iowa
this is what you refer to as.
It's like
How did
potato,
that
it's
change?
potato, tomato,
Really?
tomato, creek, crick. Yeah, people say it either way, I've heard it either way. We don't call ourselves that. Bachoje is what our word for ourselves. Most people say, it's, don't go into a long thing. Gray snow is one of the more common meanings of that. And we have another old one that we never use anymore, it was back in the 1800s, it's called Chiquiwere. Like the Oto, who are like our Iowa, our Lakota, Nakota, our partner tribes are the Oto and Missouri people. So we have that kind of a thing, like they would say for a tail, tinge, we say sinye. So it's similar language to have a dialect thing. So Iowa and Iowa, so they went Chiwere, and we would say Chiquiwere. But Bachoje is the one we use the most.
Any other questions?
Thank you, guys.